Chapter 211. Chapter 47. The End of the Sea in Dusk. Under the authority of the Divine King, when the decree was issued, transformation ensued. The fire Zeus referred to was naturally not just about the flame. In fact, the flame was only an insignificant part of it. It's a term rich in symbolic meaning. For the flame was a gift to humans from Hestia, one of the deities most friendly towards humans, yet the first act of deception against the gods took place in her temple, and the goddess was not only in charge of fire, but also held the divine authority over guardianship. Therefore, the divine king's decree was in fact severing the relationship between gods and humans, as well as cutting off all divine protection towards them and, conversely, cursing them. From that moment on, deities would no longer answer the prayers of humans, and all the gifts previously bestowed upon them by the gods were withdrawn one by one. Even beyond that, humans not only lost the fire given by the gods, but they would also be incapable of kindling fire on their own. Humans lost the bountiful harvests given by the gods, and the crops they planted would no longer germinate. Humans lost the favorable weather given by the gods, and natural disasters would henceforth be a constant companion. This was the divine king's punishment for this act of deceit, but he cleverly left some leeway. By using fire to represent all this, as long as humans regained fire, the divine protection would not be restored, but the divine punishment would also no longer continue. At that moment, some deities understood, while others did not. However, standing on Mount Olympus, Prometheus undoubtedly understood. He not only understood but also discerned even more. Give it up, brother, this is meaningless. Zeus is not kind. Even if you save humans this time, he will find other reasons to punish mortals. This generation of mortals is no longer what he wants. Standing outside the temple of the goddess of law on Mount Olympus, Prometheus once again urged his brother. Before, the two had not been able to meet Themis here. According to the nymphs stationed here, the goddess had left in haste after returning. The laws of gods should not be applied to humans, nor should the statutes of gods necessarily suit humans, and at that point, humans actually had no law. The goddess destroyed the temple because her name was misused by humans since she had never allowed such an act, but in reality, besides this, humans hadn't really violated any rules, because she had never set any rules for them. Therefore, the goddess decided to set a standard, defining under what circumstances a mortal could claim the justice of judgment in her name. The goddess of law was first the creator of the law, then the enforcer of it, and she could not enforce what she had not decided. So she left Olympus, planning to seek the help of an old friend and trying to establish the initial standard for humans, courts, at Novelban at. As for what specifically constituted guilt and innocence, that was up to humans themselves. Her responsibility was only to ensure that the trials she witnessed conformed to regulations. If someone dared to violate her set criteria in a court after she had established the standard, she would also administer punishment according to the regulations she had outlined. Therefore, the brothers planned to wait here until the goddess returned. But the wait ended before it even began. Zeus knew everything. He had brought down punishment upon humans, and now, he was waiting for Prometheus to trap himself. Perhaps, but I no longer ask for more. As long as the divine punishment is taken back and they can age peacefully, that's enough, said Prometheus, his mood somewhat complex as he looked towards the east. His most trusted student had betrayed him, yet he couldn't muster any blame towards him. After all, Osun was his creation, his pupil. If the student turned out this way, wasn't it caused by him as well? Now, the student had met his deserved fate. It all originated from me, Prometheus. Deceit against the gods was for humans, but now when I think about it, I was merely showing off my own wisdom. And perhaps I am not smart at all, just like Métis, the goddess of wisdom. Prometheus left these words unspoken. With the goddess having disappeared for 100 years and Zeus having married the new heavenly empress, the deities had vaguely guessed something. They didn't know the exact fate of the goddess renowned for her intelligence, but it likely wasn't wonderful. But what can you do, brother? Though knowing it was futile, the afterthinker still spoke. Zeus has taken away the fire from humans. The only one who could defy his will is the supreme ruler of fire. Goddess Hestia will not help you against her own brother. The goddess of the magic net who controls the element of fire is unpredictable in her movements, and the lord of the spirit realm will not answer your call. You have no place to attain the right to use fire. With a somewhat sad expression, and even appearing less foolish than before, Prometheus hoped his brother would listen to his advice. But Prometheus was not paying attention to his brother's change at the moment. Or rather, even if he had noticed, he would not have changed his decision. Zeus had uncovered everything, he had punished humans, but had ignored the instigator of it all. Prometheus knew, as the creator of humans, that it was time for him. He could have evaded it, but he didn't want to. Chapter 212. Chapter 47 The End of the Sea in Dusk _2. There is one place where not even the divine artifacts are under the control of the divine king's authority. Divine authority is absolute, not even Zeus can oppose this. Looking towards the place near the summit of Mount Olympus, where the god of sun's temple was located, Helios set off from there every day, driving the sun chariot to make the great sun rise in the east and set in the west, and then he would return there at night. As long as fire was drawn from the divine artifact, the edict of the divine king would be invalid. He won't give it to you. He is just a step away from great divine power, and faith is his hope. As a legacy of the Titans, Helios's position in the divine court is already unstable. I know, he interrupted indifferently. At that moment, Prometheus really seemed like a wise man among the gods. So, I will give him an opportunity. I will steal the fire, and then he can capture me and plead for me in front of Zeus. Of course, it won't be useful, but he will gain the gratitude of humans, and credit in the divine court. As for what would become of himself, the forethinker didn't say more. An eternal imprisonment was all it was, the location of which he could already foresee. But at the end, as if he remembered something, he started advising his brother. Leave this place, do not get involved in the affairs between the divine king and humans because of me. You two carry the credit of creating mankind, and if possible, the divine king won't let you off. Remember, do not accept any kindness from Zeus. I understand, brother. After a long silence, Epimetheus nodded in agreement. He watched as his brother casually broke off a fennel branch and then headed up the mountain under the cover of night. And he just watched all of this, doing nothing. Not getting involved in all of this, you truly are thinking of humans until the end. What about you, and me, even our brother who holds up the sky, our reclusive father? Gently shaking his head, Epimetheus knew that his brother had finally regained his sanity amidst the praise of humans and gods alike, seeing the cause and effect of this whole affair clearly. The divine king would not allow the two gods who participated in creating mankind to continue existing in the mortal realm. Thus, the forethinker needed to commit a great sin, and the afterthinker at the very least had to bring disaster upon humans to tarnish his standing in the hearts of mortals. But Epimetheus himself would be safe, something Prometheus was very clear about. After all, compared to him, the foolish afterthinker was not considered a threat by the divine king. Zeus would only use this to demonstrate his own leniency, rather than allow both brothers to face the same fate. Hence his final admonition before departing was actually just a desire to prevent his brother from causing misfortune to humanity. However, this time, Epimetheus didn't want to listen to him, just like he had never heeded the afterthinker's advice. Prometheus might be willing to consider humans, but Epimetheus only wanted to think for himself. For the sake of humans who would die sooner or later, to become a thorn in the eyes of the divine king, or even to stand against the gods, he did not want to do that. He was a god and naturally should consider issues from the perspective of a deity. Moreover, feeling the faith swirling around himself, Epimetheus didn't care about the thoughts of humans at the moment. At nobleman at. All these years living in the mortal realm hadn't been for naught. Faith, after all, does not just stem from worship. With just a slight adjustment, fear and admiration actually lead to the same end. Ellipsis. So it is said, those who betray their own class often have a hard time ending well. But if one extends the timeline, it's difficult to say what's right or wrong. After all, without stealing fire, without his favoritism towards humans, perhaps the Prometheus of later generations would just be an ordinary god and not have such a great reputation. From this perspective, he also managed to write himself into the history of mankind completely. Even if the epics change, and his share of faith no longer dominates, it will endure forever. Over the East Sea, a massive whirlpool slowly spun, billions of tons of water spiraling down into what seemed like a bottomless ocean pit, that dark place like a final resting place for all things. Laine, dressed in black robes, stood above the whirlpool, yet seemed to see the figure of the fire thief. Prometheus and the sun god were conversing, their discussion unnoticed by others, but clearly illuminated by the nearby divine artifact. After all, in this life, Hephaestus had not been born yet, and even if he were born, he would no longer have the chance to forge the sun chariot. Therefore, the great task of apprehending Prometheus naturally fell to Helios. It was hard to say whether this was good or bad, After all, Zeus might be happy to see Hera's only child benefit, but might not necessarily wish the same for the sun god. But Helios at the moment was very excited, and he decisively accepted the forethinker's request. However, he only agreed to give Prometheus half a day's time. When the sun rose the next day, he would discover that someone had tampered with his divine artifact, and then he would take the initiative to apprehend him. Speaking of which, in the lands of the East in this life, there doesn't seem to be a place called Caucasus Mountains. I wonder where he will be imprisoned this time. Withdrawing his gaze, the answer would soon be known, and Laine was not in a hurry to learn the outcome. He looked at the vast whirlpool he had caused with interest, then proceeded towards even more easterly directions. He had a premonition that the reason this unidentifiable thing appeared in the east of the world might have something to do with him. Chapter 213. Chapter 47. The end of the sea in dusk _3. Perhaps it was because the core of the current age, the sun in the East Sea, came into contact, which caused a brief disturbance at the level of the world, thereby attracting some things that should not have appeared. After all, a complete ocean and water are forces on par with the sky. If their authority had not been divided, perhaps the ancient sea god would have already reached the great realms. The sun, albeit slightly inferior, might also have reached greatness at the end of the Third Era if not for the divided power. From this perspective, perhaps all of this is a part of the destined cycle of the present age. Such potentially great divine authorities, he had divided them up long ago one by one. The most recent one was meteorology, and the next, most likely, will be light. Speeding across the ocean, Laine could see that the sea surface gradually became silent and restless. The closer it got to the edge of the world, the more lifeless it seemed and the weaker the presence of the rules of the current age became. Until, at one moment, the sea stopped out of nowhere. At the edge of the ocean, the water cascaded down like a waterfall into the endless void below, and across from the waterfall was the ever-flowing circumterrestrial river that encircled the world. Above that, one could vaguely see a palace, the residence of the god of the ocean. But in the next instant, a booming voice came from that grand divine palace. Who goes there? As Laine stepped onto the river, the effect of his robe's secrecy also dissolved. This place already belonged to the border between the current world and the beyond, even close to the edge of the world, where the suppression of laws was almost non-existent. Therefore, feeling that the symbol of his divine authority was touched by someone, the god of the ocean immediately noticed this uninvited guest. You have recovered. Watching the tall figure step out from the divine palace, Laine was somewhat surprised. Even though he had recovered completely, he ignored the fate of his daughter, which made Laine somewhat sentimental. Moreover, subsequent myths indeed did not record any deed where the god of the ocean became an enemy of Zeus due to Métis, disappearance. Chaos. Goddess was one thing. Among the male deities, there really weren't many who were good fathers, in the true sense. Laine, what brings you here? Not recognizing that the one before him was the chief culprit who had seriously injured him, Oceanus frowned slightly. His injury was indeed severe, but he was much more powerful than the god of sun, and the main symbol of his divine authority was the circumterrestrial river, not the ocean. As for why he stayed here even after his injury had healed, that was another matter altogether. Thinking this, Oceanus couldn't help but become vigilant. He didn't know what Laine was there for, but he wouldn't allow him to proceed further. At nobleman at. I've come here to find something. As the master of this place, have you noticed anything amiss recently? Not at all. Without hesitation, the god of the ocean replied immediately. Laine, who had only asked casually and did not expect an answer, was genuinely taken aback by Oceanus' reaction. Though the other party had not shown any obvious flaws, Laine's intuition told him that the other party was not telling the truth. Are you sure? Narrowing his eyes, Laine persuaded with a smile. Some things are not within your ability to handle, it might be better to tell me. My instinct tells me that what I'm looking for might not be something good. This has nothing to do with you, Laine. You think you can handle what I cannot. Besides, I've already said, there is nothing abnormal here. This is my territory, and I ask you to leave. Once again, Oceanus refused without any fear. As a Titan deity who had witnessed Laine take action, the god of the ocean believed he had some understanding of him. Moreover, this was not the land above the circumterrestrial river. Even if Mother Earth herself were to come, she would have no way to deal with him. Standing here, he feared nothing. After pondering for a moment, Laine looked at the Titan who had once oppressed him with divine power in the distant first epic, and ultimately decided to give him another chance. After all, It was he who had made the prophecy, and the god of the ocean's overreaction was somewhat understandable. So Laine nodded and calmly said, "If that's the case, then I will not disturb you." Turning around, Laine looked beyond the circumterrestrial river. Having come this far, that vague sense of something was becoming clearer and clearer. Without a doubt, the thing he was looking to find was here. Taking a step forward, Laine intended to cross the river and see for himself what was on the other side. However, as soon as he took his first step, the god of the ocean, who was originally in front of the divine palace, changed expression and flashed in front of him to block his way. What is the meaning of this? With the corners of his mouth slightly raised, Laine asked with a smile. I have said, this is my territory, you are not welcome here, please leave, the god of the ocean said coldly, with no intention of moving aside. But I am merely going to look beyond the circumterrestrial river, which I suspect does not belong to you. Still smiling, Laine added politely. As long as it's a place the circumterrestrial river flows through, it all belongs to me. Leave now, I warn you for the last time. The god of the ocean was growing impatient, perhaps more from the nervousness of his secret being discovered. His power began to gather, and upon his symbol of divine authority, Oceanus felt immensely powerful, just as he had in the past. He released his oppressive might, trying to drive away the deity in front of him. However, this time, he felt as though his power was sinking into the sea, disappearing without trace as it neared Laine. This aura, decay, ruin, death, it feels to me like twilight. Whispering softly to himself, Laine keenly sensed something. The aura leaking out as Oceanus's power vibrated was effortlessly captured by him, and it clearly mixed with some forces that the other should not possess. This confirmed Laine's suspicions. The god of the ocean had indeed come into contact with that unknown thing, and it was more than just an accidental encounter. So he dropped his smile and looked at the towering deity before him. On the tip of Laine's right hand, a dark light slowly emerged. After a century, the power of the spirit realm was once again wielded by him, and half of this great power descended at the interface of this world and the beyond. Under this force, Laine almost instantly locked onto the general location of the anomaly beyond the river, but he still first looked at the god of the ocean in front of him. Stepping forward, in the mythic world, what belongs to whom, who among the deities of chaos truly cared about such things? Now would be no exception. You say all this belongs to you, I don't see it that way. Now, I declare, this place is mine. Chapter 214. Chapter 48. A Sword and Fragments. Though he was the same person, the god of the ocean felt a completely opposite sensation in just an instant. As the words of the robed deity in front of him fell, Oceanus suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of oppression emanating from deep within. The surface of the great river that enveloped the present world invisibly dropped by a third, as if it could not bear the unbearable weight. This was the fourth time the god of the ocean had felt this way. Once had been when facing the Heavenly Father in the distant First Era, 100 years ago when confronting Cronus, and not long before, that shadow which seemed like a primordial god. But during those 3 times, he was not alone in facing this pressure. But now, no one could stand in front of him. What are you going to do? Are you going to be my enemy here? Suppressing the palpitations in his heart, Oceanus did not know what kind of change had occurred in the god before him. The power of a god was innate. Surely he wouldn't have inexplicably broken through the innate limits like Cronus did. Divine power was mobilized, and the waters gathered in his hands to form a spear as the god of the ocean spoke threateningly. Yet in front of him, Laine showed no intention of stopping. On his right hand, the black ring grew deeper. Since the time the well of reincarnation was built, this sublimated death had always existed as a part of it, and Laine had never tried its power alone. Now, it had been temporarily extracted, leaving only a small part to maintain the stability of reincarnation. Using it to kill a deity was certainly impossible, but Laine was somewhat eager to see what effects it could actually produce. Against you, you're thinking too much. Speaking calmly, before the ocean deity sovereign could breathe a sigh of relief, the authority of death transformed into a long sword held in Laine's hand. He indeed had no intention of being an enemy to the other, after all. After all, to be my enemy, you're not worthy. Clang. The black sword was raised on high, slicing through the void, and in the next moment everything in its trajectory suddenly fell silent. Air, moisture, light, even space itself. Under the power of the Great One, they were all killed by death, losing all traces of their existence in the world. Facing this sword, the god of the ocean could no longer care about Laine's previous words. he felt only a surge of fear in his heart, instinctively knowing he must not let this sword fall upon him. Laine, this is my domain. Fear turned to anger, and anger fueled strength. When the primal instincts of the Titan deity were aroused, with a furious shout from Oceanus, the river waters churned in response. The god-tainted river water surged towards the black sword. The ocean god could tell that this sword was not a divine artifact, but merely a temporary manifestation of some authority, no different than the spear gathered in his hands. Without the blessing of a divine artifact, how dare the other oppose him on the circumterrestrial river? Your domain. Now, it is mine. With a slight exertion of force, in front of Laine, the waters of the circumterrestrial river rushed along with the Titan deity's spear, but he simply held onto the sword hilt and slowly pressed down. In the next moment, both the spear and the river waters blocking his way, died, inch by inch as the black sword approached. Across from Laine, Oceanus watched in horror to find that his connection with this part of the river appeared to be temporarily erased. At nobleman at. Ah! A roar of fury and pain erupted, causing the river waters to rage violently. But this instinctual counterattack was obviously futile. Before the edge of the black sword, the giant wave was split, the surging tide was suppressed, until at last, it struck directly onto the riverbed. That seemed to be made of void. Boom! The river trembled, and the symbol of the ocean god's divine authority was directly hit, causing him as much pain as the sun once did. But Laine's sword-bearing hand finally met resistance, seeming as if the powers before his eyes were not sufficient to cause further damage. After all, the channel of the circumterrestrial river was no ordinary thing, it actually existed as a barrier at the edge of the present world. It was not a physical entity but an existence on a conceptual level, making it difficult to touch, let alone destroy. No, the power of death, even if not yet complete, is far more than that. Narrowing his eyes, perhaps the ocean god was simply unlucky. Laine's understanding of death was not originally profound, but the sense of decay he felt from the other had given him some inspiration. Gripping the hilt with both hands, Laine tried to replicate that feeling using the divine authority of spirituality, enhancing the sword's edge. The somber and desolate sensation seemed to fit well with the authority of death, so much so that Laine could clearly feel the black sword in his hand rise sharply in power, like magic being shaped into witchcraft. With a satisfied smile, he then pressed down hard. Open. With a soft cry, finally, under the incredulous eyes of the ocean god and accompanied by a sound that shook the source sea, the sword's edge continued to sink. The river was split open, and the power of decay and finale spread along the cut toward both sides of the channel. Laine felt that due to the erosion of death, the circumterrestrial river was no longer complete. Even this force was extending into the past and future along the current timeline, intending to completely and eternally sever this long river. But regrettably, whether it was life or death, their parts in the spirit realm were only after fusion and sublimation that they became great, turning their unification into a Genesis artifact. And the one using it now could hardly be said to have complete great divine power. Chapter 215. Chapter 48. A Sword and Fragments _2. Although the separated powers were strong, they clearly lacked this kind of absolute temporality, and after all, this was only a temporary power drawn from the well of reincarnation, not a naturally formed divine artifact forged by the power of death. Therefore, Laine could feel that this erosion of the past and future was soon losing its strength and was forced to end. But a rough estimate revealed that this single strike had caused destruction that would impact at least 300 years into the past and future. Laine, why are you here? What have you done? A shout of alarm echoed when Laine's sword struck, and the source sea boiled turbulently, while far in the present world, a streak of blue light was also approaching this place. At nobleman at. It was Thesis, the goddess of primordial water. When the god of the ocean resided in the divine palace at the world's edge, it was she who took charge of the ocean god's lineage. She had been discussing matters with her offspring, as in recent decades, the divine king had turned a portion of the eastern region into a forbidden area, barring the river and lake gods from the ocean god's lineage from approaching. But sensing her husband's sudden mobilization of divine power, the goddess rushed over immediately. Hastily arriving, Thesis had thought that the god of the ocean had encountered an accident there, or had again come into conflict with the previously arrived Lord of Darkness, but to her surprise, she found only Laine, treading above the river with a dissolving black sword in his hands. In front of him, a crack exuding an aura of dead silence cut across the river. Oceanus's presence was no longer detectable there. The severing of the river was not in a physical sense, as the water still flowed through that area. But this stretch of river, nearly 100 miles long, imparted a foreboding feeling, for it was too quiet. The waters upstream and downstream still surged tumultuously, even more so from their master's agony, but as soon as the waters passed through this segment, they became soundlessly calm. The tumultuous waves were stilled, the surging tides dispelled, as if the river water once crossed an invisible line and died, only to come back to life after flowing past another line at the other end. Even Thesis, the primordial water goddess, could feel that though her dominion over water remained intact, she had lost all sense of this severed segment of the river. It was as if there was a barrier between them, and with her current power, she was far from being able to break through this hindrance. To restore everything to its original state would take a century's worth of time to erode it. Death, indeed, is one of the forces in this world most adept at destruction. Laine, as the instigator of it all, was somewhat astounded by the scene before him. He had not expected that, in terms of sheer destructive force, this divine authority possessed such terrifying power. It was only because death was still so far removed from the realm of greatness. Otherwise, he even doubted whether the death dominion at the pinnacle of greatness could permanently kill a deity's control over their symbolic objects, or transform them into something else. For instance, a sun, killed by death, might not be destroyed, but could very likely become an entity that brings decline instead of vitality. In such a case, whether the original god of sun would lose their divine authority or be forced to change was unknown. No wonder Chaos's death was inherently so weak. This force that ends all things was essentially a challenge to the world's order. But now, this place has indeed become my domain. Sensing the riverbed beneath his feet temporarily transformed by the force of death, Laine turned around. He did not pay heed to the approaching primordial water goddess but instead looked towards Oceanus. A black line was also spreading across the body of the god of the ocean, reflecting the injury caused by the symbol of divine authority on the divine body. His divine power was continuously pouring into the black line, only to be instantly dissipated. Just like the riverbed under Laine's feet, the wound would be difficult to heal for 150 years and would continue to cause pain to its master. Of course, with the help of his wife, this period might be shortened. So are you willing to tell me now, what exactly is here, and what have you encountered? Laine asked calmly. Huff. What is this power? What have you done to me? However, unexpectedly, even as Oceanus was gasping for breath, he still answered evasively. It seemed that even after being struck by the sword, he was still wary. It seems I have been too lenient. Perhaps only in front of a god like Uranus will you understand what you ought to do. Laine's expression grew cold, and the sword in his right hand began to take form again. This was already considered beyond the present world, so theoretically, regardless of his actions, there shouldn't be any repercussions. Unless he intended to completely dismantle the circumterrestrial river, the rigid laws would turn a blind eye. And he was certain that even 100 strikes over a mere few hundred miles of river wouldn't hurt the river itself in any significant way. After all, as a barrier at the edge of the present world, in terms of stability alone, the circumterrestrial river surpassed the very earth and didn't need to worry about being accidentally damaged. Thus, raising the sword once more, Laine was about to strike again, but a shout stopped his actions. Wait, I know what's there, and I also know that the master of the realm of lightlessness has already gone that way. Chapter 216. Chapter 48. A Sword and Fragments _3. As a primordial god, he was only slightly behind Oceanus in discovering that place. He just can't enter it for now, but if you delay too long, that might change. In a rush to arrive, the original water goddess didn't bother to think about why Laine was so powerful. Reality was laid out before her. Although the oppression she felt from him was a bit less than that from the Lord of Darkness, the damage he inflicted on the god of the ocean was the opposite. The primordial god, on his way here, also casually drove out the ants beside him, but after taking a hit from him, Oceanus quickly recovered. By contrast, this stretch of dead riverbed was a real threat. To erase the authority of a deity, even if only temporarily, was terrifying enough. After all, any temporary paired with sufficient power and endless time could become permanent. Erebus. Pausing in his actions, a thought occurred to Laine. Hearing the name of the Lord of Darkness, he was both unexpectedly unsurprised. If the circumterrestrial river is the edge between land and ocean, then the domains of the two primordial gods are on the edge of the underworld, and Tartarus is directly beneath the world's concept. Being closer naturally leads to earlier discovery, there's nothing surprising about that. However, he had originally planned to invite Nyx to explore this place after some probing, but now it seemed he had to go on his own. So what is actually there? Speaking solemnly, Laine's black sword in hand did not dissipate. The god of the ocean seemed to want to interject, but ultimately kept silent. He had been warned by the Lord of Darkness, which is why he had been so secretive. But he now realized, although the primordial god who had flung him back into the ocean was terrifying, after experiencing a sword strike from Laine, he understood the latter might not be much less so. And with one right in front of him and the other far away, the choice of what to do didn't require much thought, especially having already taken a sword strike. Regarding that, we are not entirely clear ourselves, because, by the time I got there, the place was already sealed by the chains of the laws of chaos. Shaking his head slightly, Thesis slowly said, I only know that there seems to be a vast expanse of broken fragments, some big, some small. They seem to have been knocked into this place somehow due to the turmoil in the East Sea 100 years ago, but what? Seeing this, Laine pressed the question. But their auras are very strange, just like their broken state, radiating from inside out a sense of decay, and some also give me an inexplicable feeling of threat. I don't know what's actually there, because we didn't wait for the chains of chaos's laws to decay enough to enter, before we were driven out by His Highness Erebus who arrived later. That's all I know. Looking at Laine, Thesis sincerely said, so, can you retract this force now? The original water goddess referred to the force of death on the long river channel. Hearing this, Laine raised his eyebrows but remained unmoved. He and the god of the ocean were never friendly, and now the latter was willing to answer his questions only under the coercion of his martial strength. He was even less inclined to overlook this. Consider this sword mark a lesson, Oceanus. Even Gaia has never claimed that no deities are allowed to pass over the land. And the divine king does not reject my wandering the world, let alone you. Let it remain here, so that when I return, it will at least be from my domain. At Nobleman at. The black sword dissipated, and now that he knew the source of the disturbance, Laine hesitated no longer. Casting one last glance at the two Titan gods, he turned into a streak of silver light and left with a flick of his sleeve. In his wake, looking at his departing figure, the two deities remained silently speechless. It was first Cronus breaking through the boundary for some unknown reason, and now the once not so powerful Laine suddenly showing terrible strength. In just 100 years, the familiar chaos world seemed somewhat strange. At that moment, the god of the ocean spontaneously felt a yearning to reach even further. If it were any other deity, the desire would merely remain so, but he was different, he had this opportunity. As long as he could completely rule the sea and foster a closer alliance with Thesis in terms of divine authority, then as the master of all water in the world, he just might be able to touch that step. After all, the earth and water of chaos, naturally superior to wind and fire, once divided, created three deities of extraordinary strength within their divine power, and even dozens of true gods and countless territorial gods. If he could unite them, that force might not be weaker than Gaia, who had been repeatedly weakened. I remember you mentioned, Zeus has demarcated a forbidden zone in the eastern region. After a moment of silence, bearing the pain, the god of the ocean inquired. Yes, no deity is allowed near there, including our offspring. Nodding, the goddess replied. No matter what's there, once my wounds heal, I'll go there myself to see. I need to know what he's up to before I move against Poseidon, to be sure he won't interfere. It's a good idea, I'll go with you then. Grazing the black scar across her husband's chest, the power within it caused Thesis' hands to sting slightly. The gods were still quite unfamiliar with death, especially such a mighty death. Their thoughts still dwelled on the simple mortality of worldly beings, which made this power, seemingly capable of ending all things, truly alarming. Zeus, our foster son, indeed won't intervene in the sea as the divine king, that's the promise he made to me as the guardian of oaths. However, he definitely won't want to see the sea under one rule. To prevent the deities of Olympus from actively helping Poseidon, we should indeed see what he's up to. If discovered, we'll just say we're searching for Métis. Speaking of their missing daughter, neither of the Titan deities seemed to harbor much worry or anger. In the original myths, the couple had never had a conflict with the divine king over Métis, and now they weren't planning to delve deeper. The daughter, who was blinded by Zeus's sweet words, was no longer seen as one of their own. Now, she merely served as an excuse, a means for her parents to fulfill their own purposes. Leaving the circumterrestrial river behind, Laine set foot in this place close to the outside of the world for the first time. To say it is outside the world is not quite accurate, this place resembles the starless sky. Walking through it, Aside from the increasingly distant and fading circumterrestrial river behind him, Laine could hardly see anything else. Strictly speaking, this place still belonged to the realm of Chaos World because it was existent. The true outside of the world, whether you call it chaos or void, is non-existent. Ex nihilo, the act of something emerging from nothing as the real driving force behind the birth of a world, a miracle that defies the underlying logic of the worlds Laine had known in his previous and current lives. And that true non-existence is something Laine now, or even the spirit realm, cannot directly touch. Only a complete world like chaos could anchor itself in nothingness, and even draw strength from it. The object of Laine's quest seemed to be this non-existence that came from outside the world, like his soul that came to chaos, a creation that did not originally belong here. Nothing is born out of thin air. Was the collision between the sun and the East Sea really the source of this upheaval? He pondered. Perhaps not. Laine felt that maybe the other things he had done were the underlying causes of it all. Chapter 217. Chapter 49 Remnants of the Nine Realms. Backquote. Continuously voyaging forward, in the blink of an eye Laine had no idea how far he had traveled, yet in the void outside this world, it felt as though he was treading in place. Without a point of reference, he couldn't ascertain how far he had moved. Only the ever-diminishing river ring behind him bore witness to Laine's progression. Gradually, Laine's divine body began to blur, and he had to summon more power from the spirit realm to maintain stability. However, even the connection with the spirit realm was becoming somewhat unclear here. This wasn't due to the environment being particularly hostile or any force obstructing. In fact, it was simply because Chaos's presence was growing weaker here. A divine body, or the various laws for that matter, are in fact all products based on the world itself. As the world's presence weakens, everything established under the world's laws naturally becomes unstable. However, Laine unexpectedly found that the power of the spirit realm seemed to smooth out this instability with relative ease. More specifically, it came from that strand of temporal divinity that Laine had invested at the inception of the spirit realm. Time and space. I still don't know how I arrived here in the first place. Even now, regarding his own crossing experience, Laine was still largely in the dark. Tens of thousands of years ago, when he awoke, he was already the first deity of chaos. Even the fact that the world had once tried to completely kill him was something Laine learned only after pioneering samsara. Anything earlier, he could only speculate. Regardless, the outcome was always good. Moving forward, Laine continually approached the location he had previously sensed. At one moment, Chaos's presence in the surrounding void stopped decreasing and instead began to rise slowly. Laine's spirits lifted, but he became cautious. According to what the original water goddess had said, the world's laws had locked these unexpectedly arrived fragments, and the current developments undoubtedly proved this point. Chaos's power extended over, and its presence here naturally strengthened. However, this also meant that the Lord of Darkness was likely nearby. We're here. After a while, the chains of law were faintly visible. At the edge of his vision, Laine could clearly see twinkling dots of various sizes buoyed in the void. At Nobleban at. Chains of law bound them, as the world's power continuously flowed out, eroding the barriers on the surface of these dots. Nearby, a familiar figure stood, quietly observing everything in front. The Dark Overlord Erebus. Laine had prepared himself for the possibility that Erebus would use his divine authority to turn himself into a secret, hidden on the side. However, to his surprise, the other party was just openly waiting here. Noticing the newcomer, Erebus turned his head. He looked toward Laine approaching from afar, showing no intention of making a move. Laine, long time no see. The last face-to-face conversation we had was in the millennia past. Wearing a smile, the Dark Overlord appeared polite and courteous, not at all like someone who had fought Laine without any reservation 100 years before. Indeed, it's been a while, but I thought you would welcome my arrival with more enthusiasm. Stopping not far from Erebus, Laine remained composed, yet his vigilance never lessened. Meanwhile, he slowly surveyed his surroundings. The dots were within reach, but Laine had already discerned that in actuality, they ranged from 1,000 miles in size to immeasurably large realm fragments. Only under the dual actions of the void and the chains of the laws of chaos, size had lost its meaning. Only a few among them could be vaguely distinguished as larger than the others, likely because those fragments seemed to be part of the main body and thus appeared somewhat special. When we fought before, It was because chaos was only so big. You had already taken so many steps ahead of me. As a successor, I naturally had to slow down your progress. But the situation with these is different. I have to choose one to enter, and cannot be locked in confrontation with you indefinitely. Once I leave, you will still be able to enter. Needless conflict, naturally, has no point in proceeding. Erebus said directly, looking at the specks of fragments before him. If there was meaning in taking action, he would not hesitate. But if it was meaningless, he obviously wouldn't bother. On the side, Laine nodded in agreement with the words of the Lord of Darkness. He respected Erebus's perspective. To be strict, just like the results of their battle at the turn of the era, Laine's strength was still somewhat inferior to his opponent. This was not the difficult to repair level of impairment like Gaia's, but rather an imperfection in divine power. If the complete great divine power's lower limit was considered level 21, the personified avatars of other great ones consisted of divine power infinitely close to that realm, plus the base level of their original being. In this aspect, the level of the spirit realm was no less than the others, yet the gap in divine power still existed. In Laine's original plan, there were no such suddenly appearing realm fragments, so like the past millennia, he continued to enhance his divine power steadily and unhurriedly. But just as the other had said, if there were only one realm fragment, then they might have had to fight over it. Yet since there were more than one, there was no need for conflict. Moreover, most crucially, these fragments were likely not just laid out for them to take as they pleased. Nobody knew what was inside. One side's destroyed world was obscured whether due to external or internal causes, or whether it still existed here. On the other hand, chaos was also continuously wearing down their resistance. Chapter 218. Chapter 49 Remnants of the Nine Realms _2. When they completely lost the power to resist, the world would directly take away those remnants and digest them. As for what would happen after the digestion was complete, that was unknown to anyone. It was possible that they would be transformed back into origin, strengthening the power of the world. It was also possible that these remnants would be reassembled into large and small planes, attached to the main body of the world. All of this was indeterminable. Even chaos might, because of these unexpected yields, give birth to deities that did not exist in their original fateful trajectories. Laine and Erebus actually had only a short moment to explore these remnants. That was when the world level power on the remnants was nearing erasure by chaos, yet had not been completely erased. This was also why the Dark Overlord had previously waited here. These remnants, since they could drift from the void outside of the world, naturally retained the true power of the world. Faced with a piece of cake that was destined to be uneaten, the two of them should naturally focus on how to eat it faster. You're right. So, do you have a target? Agreeing, Laine spoke as he looked at the cluster of remnants in front of him. First come, first served, I'll let you choose first. Although he had only arrived for a short while, Laine had already roughly browsed through the surrounding plane fragments. Among these remnants were 9 particularly colossal ones, onto which the thickest chains of law were locked, while the rest were far inferior. Undoubtedly, these 9 were their true targets. Despite the separation of the forces of the world, it was still possible to vaguely distinguish the differences between these fragments. However, the more Laine looked at these fragments, the more shocked he felt. He had guessed why these fragments had come to chaos. Previously, Laine thought it was the result of the great sun bathes the eastern seas, but now it seemed that, at most, it served as an accelerator, and determined that the location of these fragments' approach was towards the east of the world. What truly attracted them here was probably Laine himself and the 9 hells that he had opened not long ago. On the level of the world, information, energy, and matter were essentially equivalent, and the same information could create special connections. Laine had named the 5th layer of hell Midcourt, merely as a tribute to the past, never expecting to actually draw the real Midcourt here. What he didn't expect more was that what he had drawn was not alive, but dead. This was actually quite logical. After all, if it were a complete world, it might not come simply because of a name. However, looking at the remains of these dead worlds, Laine doubted whether there were any living beings left inside these fragments. Let's go with this one, it looks very suitable. That being said, this time, we both don't know the outcome. Erebus, who obviously did not know what Laine was thinking, had simply pointed to a target he had set his eyes on from the start. It was one of the 9 largest fragments. Although it looked ordinary at first glance, it was undoubtedly dominated by the forces of darkness. Laine was not surprised by Erebus's choice. The reason he generously let the other choose first was because anyone would prefer to choose options close or opposed to themselves when it was unclear what exactly was contained within. And among the 9 fragments present, there just so happened to be 2 that were individually dominated by darkness and light. Then I'll choose this one. When it comes to luck, I still have a great deal of confidence. With a casual gesture, Laine selected a fragment twinkling with golden light. He was actually a bit hesitant. Another fragment exuding chill and one shrouded in mist were also important, but in the end, Laine still chose this one. After all, this was just the initial choice. As long as one was fast enough, no rule stated that only one fragment could be explored, and the same applied to Erebus. Alright, that's settled then. Glancing at Laine's choice, Erebus did not find anything amiss. In chaos, Laine had been born earlier than he had, therefore he possessed methods unknown to him, which was understandable. But when facing these things from outside of the world, they were on the same level. Even the power of fate was perhaps useless before these plain fragments that did not belong to chaos. Therefore, although Laine was initially known to the world for prophecy, Erebus did not think he could see anything at Nobleman at. The so-called luck was probably not going to be effective here. Thus, having made their choices, the 2 of them stopped conversing, as there was nothing for them to talk about. At the edge of this world, they silently observed the spectacular collision of world forces. Although both belonged to a world, the spirit realm was undoubtedly far inferior to chaos and the ancestors of these remnants. They were complete planes that could exist on their own in the void, and Laine still had a long way to go. In the midst of the mutual confrontation of the forces of 2 worlds, many things that were usually hard to observe revealed themselves. Laine was unclear about Erebus's gains, but he had indeed learned some useful techniques from them. Time passed, indeterminably so, and even some of the smaller remnants were completely erased of resistance by chaos, then dragged into the void by chains of law until they disappeared. Until a certain moment, the power on those 9 largest fragments finally reached a nadir, and it was possible to break through them. Chapter 219. Chapter 49 Remnants of the 9 Realms _3. Backquote. Now, out of the corner of his eye, Laine noticed that Erebus's figure had disappeared without a trace, and he stepped closer to the fragment he had chosen. The divine authority of death once again transformed into the black sword, which he grasped tightly with both hands, summoning the power of the spirit realm to strike fiercely on the surface of the fragment. In silence, a barely noticeable crack appeared and then healed. But when it reverted to its original state, Laine's figure had also vanished without a trace. Thus, in the void beyond this world, the past silence was restored once more. Ellipsis. Lights and shadows flashed before him, and illusions ebbed and flowed. The moment he stepped into the fragment, time seemed to stretch into infinity, and scenes from days gone by unfolded one after another before Laine. That seemed to be the memory of the world, containing its desires before destruction. In the visions, Laine seemed to see ice and fire clearly delineating and then converging at the junction, within a void spanning the chasm on both sides. From the original spring in the northern land of ice and mist, 12 rivers extended, flowing southward into the territory of the Kingdom of Flames. The river water cycled eternally between the domains of ice and fire, solidifying into glaciers and evaporating into mist. Ultimately, in this perpetual cycle, the first life, the Titans, were born. Step. The illusion dissipated, and when Laine came back to his senses, he found himself inside the world of the fragment. Unlike what he saw from the outside, there was no golden light here, only a landscape of deathly stillness. The sky was dim, the ground cracked, and a sense of decay and ruin permeated the surroundings, without any sign of life. On the ground, with the vision of a deity, one could occasionally spot distant ruins of buildings or dried-up riverbeds, all seeming to prove that in the past, a race with intelligence had once existed here. And looking at all this, Laine's speculations were finally confirmed. Asgard, the highest of the 9 realms, the domain ruled by the Aesir tribe, is indeed this place. Who would have thought? I just picked a name at random, and it would actually summon its rightful owner. Laine felt somewhat emotional. Without a doubt, the predecessor of this broken world was indeed another world recorded in later myths. Unlike chaos, although this present world was somewhat isolated from the exterior, also forming interfaces like the underworld that almost claimed to be a realm in itself, chaos as a whole was still integral, which was not the case here. In the days when this world was whole, a world tree stood tall among the realms, with the 9 great nations each suspended in different positions of the tree, together constituting this fantastic and magnificent mythic world. At Nobleman at. The Mid-court. That Laine previously named for the fifth layer of hell was located right in the center of the nine realms, also known as Midgard, the world where mortals dwelled. As for Asgard, where he was currently, it was the highest of the nine realms, the domain of the Aesir tribe, ruled by the famed divine King Odin in later times. If I remember correctly, in the records of the Scandinavian mythology, one of the three roots extending from the world tree reaches here, taking root next to the well of Erd. I wonder what, if anything, is left of them now. Standing mid-air, Laine looked into the distance. The potential remnants of divine King Odin, the possibly destroyed well of Erd, the legendary rune symbols, and the roots of the world tree, these were the reasons Laine chose this world. Although it was highly probable that not all of them remained, finding just one would make him feel that his journey was worthwhile. Chapter 220. Chapter 50 Conspiracy. Rune symbols, in Norse mythology, were the mysterious characters that divine King Odin obtained by sacrificing himself to himself while hanged upon a tree. Self-sacrifice might sound illogical, yet as a deity, Laine had come to a deeper understanding of it. The one offering the sacrifice was Odin, yet the recipient was also divine King. The present self was sacrificing to the future self, with Odin as a deity making a sacrificial offering to the world, and what he ultimately gained were the rune characters, which contained the secrets of the world tree's origins. Although as text describing another world's law, rune symbols might not be as effective in Chaos World, Laine was more interested in their principle of existence. If he could obtain and decipher them, then Laine could reconstruct the original spirit script, creating his own rune symbols, and use them to describe the rules of the spirit realm with greater clarity and detail. Any achievements based on these symbols would be like adding bricks and mortar to the spirit realm itself. Besides the symbols, the importance of the world tree Yggdrasil hardly needs mentioning. Serving as the singular force sustaining the nine realms of a mythic world, its withering heralded the arrival of the twilight of the gods, proving it to be a plant far more formidable than the golden apple tree. Although what stood here was not its main trunk but only one of its three major roots, and although Laine was unsure whether the world tree still held any life, this did not diminish its significance. Whether used to forge divine artifacts or as a template to cultivate a new divine tree, its value was unquestionable. As for the Fountain of Erd, records of it in later generations were few and far between, but what could be certain was that it was a spring imbued with the powers of purification and vitality. It had healed Odin's wounds and had been used year-round to water the world tree. The three Norns, symbols of destiny in Asgard, were always near it. However, Laine was rather indifferent about it. After all, he now had the well of reincarnation. Even if he acquired this spring, it would just be something extra for nourishing plants and brewing drinks. It was hard to say if it would be of any significant use. And as for Odin's legacy, Laine was not quite certain of its existence. After all, the twilight of the gods as recorded in later myths was not like the current situation, which encompassed all living creatures including the deity race, not just the world itself. Even after that so-called twilight, the light god, Balder and the god of blindness, who had killed him, returned from the land of the dead and together with the surviving deities rebuilt Asgard. But now, no matter how one looked at it, this world seemed deader than dead. Still, one must be cautious. Who knows how this world was destroyed? Besides, in the mythic world, phenomena often also possess power and can even birth unique life forms. The death of a world, what might it bring about? Here, Laine's connection with the spirit realm had grown exceedingly faint, and even this broken realm was instinctively suppressing outsiders, but he still spotted his goal at first glance. In the center of that realm, a vast network of withered roots, visible yet hidden, even from an unknowable distance. Hope there will be some gains. With a move, Laine flew towards the immense silhouette that reached from earth to sky. In a world starkly different from chaos, where deities could be slain in even age, as it seemed for the later myths involving Heracles. The principle behind all this was certainly worth exploring. Ellipsis. Chaos World, atop Mount Olympus. Although Laine had left the present world due to an unexpected premonition, the world itself did not cease to move. When humanity plunged into chaos due to the sudden loss of divine gifts, the nearby beasts, which had been wary of a particular aura, noticed its disappearance and started encroaching in the direction of human settlements. Panic and fear spread among the people, and unrest was about to erupt. Meanwhile, in the divine palace of the god of sun, Prometheus held a fennel branch in his hand and stretched it towards the ornate sun chariot. He knew that his seemingly covert actions were actually anticipated by more than one deity, such as Helios, who had already made an agreement with him, and like the ruler of Mount Olympus, the divine king, at Novelban at. They had not truly seen his actions, but they knew what the forethinker was doing. However, even though Prometheus was aware of this, that they were all waiting for him to commit his crime so they could achieve their goals by stepping on his corpse, he still resolutely ignited the fire. When the fennel branch caught fire, a type of right was transferred. From that moment on, this branch gained immortality, for it bore the right granted by the Lord of the Spirit realm to wield fire. The branch was merely a vessel, for as long as the concept of fire existed in the spirit realm, it would be undying and indefeasible by any deity unless Prometheus himself wished otherwise. Laine had granted this right to the sun chariot, whose master had voluntarily relinquished it, so now, it was transferred to a new god. Of course, this would also become the new god's source of suffering. Zeus would certainly demand that he reclaims this right, and Prometheus would naturally refuse. This is the fire of mankind. Chapter 221. Chapter 50 Conspiracy _2. From today onwards, the fire of humans will no longer be a gift from the gods, including myself. After a moment of silence, Prometheus turned and flew toward the mortal realm. Now, he had become a fire thief, who defied the edict of the divine king. Atop Mount Olympus, sensing the transfer of this special privilege from his divine artifact, Helios smiled with satisfaction. He was ready to proclaim his benevolent acts among the future humans and then to become as powerful a god of sun as his father. Another bystander, however, King Zeus, was somewhat irritated. When he sensed that hot and warm breath drawing away from the sun god's divine palace, although it was all within his expectations, the fact that Prometheus so blatantly disregarded his existence and directly contravened the divine king's orders still nettled Zeus somewhat. However, this would be the last time. The divine king had already secretly resolved to give this titan deity an unforgettable lesson and use his existence to warn the gods, particularly the sun god. Zeus was unaware of the conversation between the sun god and Prometheus, as his divine authority did not extend that far. Yet without thinking, he could guess that, although Helios might have carelessly allowed the divine fire to be stolen by Prometheus, such coincidence was a bit too convenient. And the king of the gods does not believe in coincidences. Meanwhile, as the king of gods and the sun god reacted differently to the forethinker's actions, in a secluded part of the third tier of the spirit realm, a young deity in a gray robe was also witnessing this event in a hidden dream domain. However, what caught his attention was not Prometheus but the fire burning in his hands. To Hypnos, just a paranoid and weak deity, it wasn't a significant concern. What truly interested him was the privilege to wield fire. The god of sleep was already born when the sun chariot was crafted, so he was well aware of where this flame originated. That being, theoretically, the father god and the true ruler of the seven spirit realms. Indeed, he is not here now, at least not for the time being. Observing every detail of Prometheus stealing fire intently, Hypnos finally confirmed his suspicion. The privilege of using fire lost control temporarily, or rather, its master, for some reason, had no time to attend to these matters. Thus, he let his secondary holder send it out and then let it be carried to the mortal realm. This matched perfectly with what Hypnos had seen in the dreams of marine life, where his powerful father god, for reasons unknown, had left the spirit realm for the east beyond the East Sea, at the edge of the world. Now, undoubtedly, was an excellent opportunity. Since that is the case, it's time for me to meet him. I wonder what he truly wants to say to me. His expression shifting slightly, such an opportunity was rare. Thus, Hypnos lightly fluttered his wings behind him and vanished amidst falling gray shadows. At Novelban at. On the shores of the East Sea, in a nameless mountain valley. The void fluctuated, and the figure of Hypnos emerged. He exhaled deeply, noting the difficulty of sneaking out of the spirit realm as a young deity. He really had to thank the completion of the dream domain, which had made the goddess of the nether moon less vigilant of him. Otherwise, Hypnos felt that even without Laine, it would be nearly impossible to leave the spirit realm without a trace. In the valley, apart from Hypnos, a figure in a black robe had been waiting there for some time. Good evening, Prince Hypnos, it seems you've finally made up your mind. A smile curled at the corners of his mouth as Mephisto, who had ascended through fire just a few days ago, stood unscathed before him. Everything that had happened among the humans these past days was within the expectation of the Lord of the Demons. Even the informant's envy and resentment toward the gods had to be thanked for the hidden influence of the goddess Megara. Do not pray to the gods for eternal life, was the parting admonition Mephisto had given to another human high priest. Given the fate of his colleague, he believed the priest would make the right decision. Now, the final piece of his plan was about to fall into place. A powerful yet ignorant deity of the spirit realm had dared to betray his creator, something that initially baffled Mephisto. But he soon understood that the noble prince must have developed some misapprehensions. After all, as a demon, if it were not for his reincarnation just as the realm was being established, he would hardly have an opinion about the Lord of the Nine Hells. Stop playing mysterious, and tell me, what is this opportunity you mentioned? Frowning slightly, Hypnos didn't like the demon before him. Perhaps due to a natural repulsion between similar natures, he had no fondness for this quasi-god adept at deceit, but the information, inadvertently, leaked through mortal dreams compelled the god of sleep. Thus, in the end, he came. I beg your pardon for not being able to divulge specific matters. His smile unchanged, Mephisto easily dodged the gray feathers falling through the void. On a land where divine power could not be exercised, he wasn't particularly afraid of the now mature god of sleep. However, I can assure you that I will do something significant in the mortal realm, something big enough to enrage many beings in the spirit realm and trigger them to pursue me. Chapter 222. Chapter 50 Conspiracy_3. When that time comes, perhaps the spirit realm will be exceptionally empty, and whatever your highness wishes to do, it will be the perfect opportunity. He found it amusing to fantasize about the deity before him, who, as a god of the spirit realm, dared to rebel against the lord of the spirit realm. It was as unbelievable as demons rebelling against the lord of the nine hells. However, for Mephisto, it didn't matter whether the other party was successful or not. As long as they took action, there was a great chance those gods of the spirit realm would be attracted back. As for the fate of this esteemed highness, that had nothing to do with the demon lord. It sounds good, but what guarantee do you have that what you're saying is true? The young deity clad in gray was clueless about the devil's thoughts, but Mephisto's words indeed piqued his interest. Just as in the myths, where he once caused the peak-level Zeus to dream, Chaos's association with sleep and death was inverted. The former was overwhelmingly powerful, while the latter was weak and fragile. Thus, Hypnos was extremely confident in his domain of sleep, believing that as long as he was given a chance to launch a surprise attack, he could ensnare any being, provided he only had a single opponent. And those devout spirit realm angels were the biggest stumbling block in his path. How about an oath on the Styx River? Just as he had done with Keto and Megara before, Mephisto planned to deceive again, but this time, his trickery was seen through by the other party. As I understand it, only true gods are qualified to swear on the Styx River and receive a response. The smile held no warmth, as the young deity slowly said. That's why Styx is also called the River of Hatred. It is two different rivers for true gods and those who are not. Although you possess power akin to a deity, I'm afraid you are not a true god with an immortal essence and authority. A bit surprised, since gods rarely dealt with non-divine beings at this time, and beings like Keto were unaware of the secrets of the River of Vows, unlike the deity before him, who knew it all too well. Even though, as far as Mephisto was aware, the great lord of the nine hells was already trying to create an oath medium that any being could use, at present it did not exist. But this wasn't a problem, just as if the one who had just tried to deceive wasn't himself, Mephisto spoke. But we don't need guarantees between us, do we? No one can provide a guarantee anyway. You wouldn't dare to have me swear by the spirit realm, nor can I swear by the nine hells that stand behind me, so let's just forego guarantees altogether. When that day arrives, you'll see the gods of the spirit realm heading to the mortal world, and you'll naturally know that my words were true. After some contemplation, the god of sleep finally nodded. Just as the other had said, being the one to act later, he could adapt as necessary. If the situation wasn't right, he could simply wait for the next opportunity. If it weren't for the emergence of faith, making him fear that his father god would gain stronger power, Hypnos would be content to wait longer. Then it's settled, respected highness. I'll take my leave now. With his goal achieved, Mephisto took his leave with those words. As his form burst into a cloud of black mist and then dissipated into nothingness, the valley was soon left with only Hypnos, alone. Standing here, the god of sleep felt the world on the opposite side, the vast and boundless spirit realm, and couldn't help but reaffirm his own thoughts once again. The spirit realm, truly magnificent. With a long sigh, as the builder of the third layer of the spirit realm, the young deity knew all too well the might of the spirit realm. He didn't dare to go against the ancient and great spirit realm itself, but having witnessed the power of both Nyx and Gaia, the god of sleep felt that the relationship between his father god and the spirit realm was probably not as inseparable as that of the primordial gods and their essences. Because Laine gave him the impression of a very high stature under the blessing of the spirit realm, yet lacking equally strong divine power, which led the god of sleep to speculate that perhaps for Laine, his relationship to the spirit realm was more akin to that of a divine king to the present world. Only the spirit realm was more generous, allowing its agent to wield more power, and not as limited as the divine kings of the present world, who gain very little. I heard that you were once involved in the succession of the first divine king. I remember in the legends, the Heavenly Father was also a heaven-granted divine king, right? With a smile that was gentle yet indifferent, Hypnos recalled this secret he had gleaned from dreams. Kingship is never eternal. How you obtain it is how you will lose it. Well said, but have you ever considered that you too might have such a day? The naturally indifferent evil gods were ungrateful, they only feared power. And as long as they saw an opportunity, they would show no mercy. In a single step, the young deity returned to his domain in the dream spirit realm. Hypnos believed that everything today would only be perceived by the two participants, and perhaps only by the law of the present world and the spirit realm itself. It won't be long before I become the new master of the spirit realm, just like the second divine king, Cronus. With some anticipation, the god of sleep once again immersed himself in his authority, watching the various happenings in the world, while creating some terrible dreams for entertainment. In the past, this was one of his few amusements that he found interesting. Ellipsis. Outside the world, the ruins of Asgard. One thing the god of sleep had guessed correctly. Laine's energy was indeed not focused on the spirit realm at the moment. He was busy exploring this world that had already been destroyed, and all other matters would have to wait until his return. After some time flying, the roots of the world tree grew clearer and clearer. The debris of buildings on the ground became denser, yet throughout his journey, Laine found no sign of life. Not even a single corpse was to be seen. At Nobleban at. As the core of Asgard, this place was also known as the Idaval Plains. Laine casually collected some unique minerals and relatively intact buildings during his flight, but these were not significant finds. The core of this place had only two key locations: Valgrand, the palace where the gods gathered, and the Golden Palace, as well as Laine's prior target, the Well of Erd and the roots of Yggdrasil. So, after a while, seeing the tall palace in front of him that seemed well preserved, Laine knew he had found the place. Although he had originally intended to go to the roots of Yggdrasil first, since he had found the other target first, changing the order didn't really matter. Chapter 223. Chapter 51. The Skull of Mimir. Who knows how much time has passed or what kind of catastrophe has occurred, but as of today, Asgard lies in ruins and wreckage. However, standing before Laine, this towering divine palace still stood unyielding. Overall, the main body of the Golden Palace somewhat resembled a steeper pyramid, with various structures extending from its body. Suspended galleries, protruding watchtowers like spikes, and numerous skylights and floating bridges. This famous palace within the 9 realms of Scandinavian mythology was far from the primitive abode of the chaotic gods, but instead showcased exquisite constructions throughout. Even Laine could discern the rune traces etched on the walls of the Golden Palace, in crevices, and even penetrating into the bricks and stones. It was conceivable that this was not merely an ordinary building. In the past, this divine king's palace may have held extraordinary power, a creation of both divine power and magic, capable of fending off all invaders. Now, however, it had lost most of its divine majesty and was merely an edifice of exceptional material. Creak. With just a thought, the towering doors of the Golden Palace slowly opened, revealing the dim corridor within, and Laine peered inside. Along the sides of the corridor paved with rune slabs, there were trays suspended in midair. From the remaining traces, these were supposed to be alight with ever-burning immortal flame, yet now they were nowhere to be seen. Because this world has already died, those inherently unimpressive transcendental constructs naturally also lost their power. After a careful observation and confirming that there was no danger, Laine stepped through the grand entrance of the Golden Palace. He could see, on the left and right sides of the corridor, paintings on the walls. Much like the Oracle of Delphi provided Laine the civilization slate and the Sevir's temple, they depicted the past of the Golden Palace, the most well-known deeds of the gods, and the origins of Asgard. Of course, there were also parts that were embellished, like the grand tale of the tall walls encircling Asgard. The narrative of their construction was one such example. In the myths of later generations, it was a marvel built by a titan and his horse Svadilfari. After a war, the gods resolved to rebuild the protective walls of their realm, and an outsider titan offered to undertake this arduous task. However, in exchange, the titan demanded the goddess of beauty, Freya, to be his wife, along with ownership of the sun and the moon. The gods agreed to his terms, but the condition was that the high wall had to be completed within a season, otherwise the titan would receive no reward. The gods never intended to pay, as they didn't believe anyone could build the rune-covered high wall encircling Asgard in just one season. To their surprise, not only was the titan skilled in construction, but his horse Svidilfari far surpassed his prowess. In their desperation, having sworn not to harm the titan during the construction of the wall, the gods had to send the deceptive Loki to prevent the completion of the wall within the deadline. And Loki did not disappoint them. He transformed into a mare, lured Svidilfari's attention away, and successfully stopped the completion of the high wall. And the consequence is quite amusing. When the infamous god of trickery returned, he was followed by another colt. This colt would become renowned in later ages, for it was Odin's steed, the eight-legged horse Sleipnir, at Novelban at. However, the murals portrayed a different story. The wicked titan sought to deceive the gods, and his horse even intimidated the god of trickery. In the end, the titan's schemes were exposed, and he presumptuously demanded his undeserved reward, so the gods granted him another form of payment, Thor's hammer Mjolnir. He was slain by the wrathful Thor, ending his sinful life. Indeed, history is like a young girl dressed by many, written only by the victors. Following the murals, some content was known to Laine while some was not, but what they had in common was the portrayal of the grandeur of the Aesir tribe, without a hint of anything unfavorable. But this was normal. The real history, after all, is enough for oneself to know. What is shown to others is naturally only the good side. Yes, outsider, as you say, the true history is known only to those who have lived through it, like myself. Since stepping into this palace, a barrier had been continuously surrounding Laine. With an unchanged expression, he listened to the sudden voice, attempting to locate its source. However, the now ruined Asgard did not welcome him, an outsider deity, and even though its essence had died, it still possessed considerable might, and the Golden Palace also retained some remnants of divine majesty. Hence, under dual suppression, Laine found nothing. Strange deity, do not be alarmed, I am already a deceased being. The reason I can still converse with you is merely good fortune. Noticing Laine's search, that voice came again. The voice was old and hoarse, yet the language was immediately understood. This speaker likely held power related to language, wisdom, and knowledge. This time, Laine made some discovery. The source of the voice seemed to be the Golden Palace itself. The speaking entity apparently held some control over the original privileges of the temple. Chapter 224. Chapter 51 Mimir's Skull _2. However, dead beings, hearing this voice's account, Laine had a guess. Are you right here, in the center of the temple? He asked calmly in the other's language, for Laine, who likewise held relevant authority, instantly learned the pronunciation of this language. Yet the fact that the first local he was about to meet might just be an ornament was somewhat amusing to him. It seemed the Aesir tribe had become extinct, but the abandoned remnants they left behind still existed, an irony indeed. Of course, strange deity, I am deep within the Golden Palace, which is also the name of this palace. You just need to come in, and you will see me, the ancient voice continued. Not knowing that much of his identity had been revealed before even meeting, the old voice went on. Come quickly, I will spare no detail about the past of this place. Ellipsis. The core of the Golden Palace. The spacious hall, the towering throne, here, where the gods of the Aesir tribe had once gathered daily, was the heart of the divine palace. But now, within the Golden Palace, the gods were gone, the throne untended, and only on a platform floating to its left was there a presence that may or may not be considered alive. It was a head, a huge, wrinkled head. He was Mimir, guardian of the spring of wisdom, and thus his name was the same as the fountain. Now, however, only a lonely head remained, still capable of thought and speech, but unable to do anything more. Outsider. A deep voice echoed in the hall, and the aged head was now twisted in a grotesque kind of joy, looking somewhat comical. He had thought he would perish with this broken world. Yet unexpectedly, he met an outsider, even though he wasn't quite sure how outside this outsider actually was. How many years has it been? Perhaps tens of thousands. I can't quite remember. Ever since Odin hurriedly left, no one has come here, he said. Sensing the unfamiliar deity rapidly approaching from the outskirts of the Golden Palace, Mimir was excited. He had never seen such an aura before, and it didn't quite fit in with Asgard, but that didn't matter. Whatever realm this god was from, he had come here with a purpose. Probably for Odin's treasure hoard. Just in time, as I hold the means to open it. To Odin, his lord, wielder of Gingnir, divine lance, king of the Aesir tribe, Mimir had no such thing as loyalty. He had been a guardian of the spring of wisdom, a member of the ancient giants. He had personally witnessed the process of Odin's self-sacrifice, as well as the revelation he received after drinking from the spring of wisdom's waters, at Nobleban at. However, afterward, between two of the 9 realms on the world tree, Asgard ruled by the Aesir tribe, and Vanaheim ruled by the Vanir, war broke out, and it was only after this war that Asgard intended to rebuild the walls that ring the realm, to safeguard its security. In the end, as both deity races grew weary of the prolonged conflict, they decided to make amends and exchanged hostages as a symbol of peace. The Vanir sent the god of sunlight and fertility, Freyr, and his sister, the goddess of beauty, Freya, one of the Vanir's finest. Yet, the cunning Odin played a trick by sending the foolish but handsome Heimdall, and the wise but aged and ugly Mimir as hostages. When the gods of Vanaheim interacted with them, Mimir acted as Heimdall's attendant, answering with his experience and knowledge smoothly. This successfully convinced them that Odin's hostages were of significant importance in Asgard, on par with the 2 deities they had sent, and thus the war between the 2 deity races came to an end. However, as time went by, Odin's trick eventually came to light, and the Vanir discovered Heimdall's foolishness, enraging them for having been deceived. But Odin had achieved his goal, and having enjoyed a long peace, the Vanir gods were not willing to restart hostilities. So Mimir became the scapegoat. His head was chopped off, sent back to the Golden Palace in Asgard as proof of Vanaheim's wrath. Odin did little more than chastise and naturally had no intention of retaliating. He merely preserved Mimir's head with herbs and rituals, allowing the ancient giant who once guarded the spring of wisdom to still think and speak. Since then, Mimir's head had served beside the throne in the Golden Palace as a counselor to the divine king, discussing matters too complex to decide. He. So, in all things, where is the absolute nature of good and evil? Like now, you are dead, and I am very much alive. Mimir had certainly not volunteered to be a hostage in Vanaheim, especially one destined to be exposed, as he never had a choice, but now it was different. He let out a chilling laugh again as his gaze shifted toward the passage not far off that led to the meeting hall. In his perception, the strange deity was nearly here. He needed to think carefully about how to persuade the other party to take him away. Once away, he might have a chance at a new beginning. Chapter 225. Chapter 51 Mimir's Skull _3. Quote. Step. Soon, the sound of footsteps grew from quiet to loud, coming from the passageway, and Laine's figure quickly appeared here. Entering the grand hall, Mimir immediately looked towards this unfamiliar deity, but Laine did not look back at him. What directly attracted Laine's gaze was not the immense head, but rather a flame that provided light to the entire hall. It flickered in midair, using the void as its fuel, and burned eternally unchanged. Laine could feel that this flame was extraordinary. This is an undying flame born in Muspelheim, the country of flames, one of the 2 most primal realms among the 9 major worlds. The flames of that land often possess some exceptional powers. Even if the very essence of Asgard has died, it remains unaffected and continues to burn. In contrast, those outside have long since been extinguished. A deep, aged voice spoke up, explaining the origins of the flame before him to Laine. As expected, the robed deity shifted his gaze in the direction of the speaker. Ahead, but with life sealed within. I must say, your manner of existence is quite interesting. Calm in demeanor, Laine sensed traces in Mimir's skull that were somewhat similar to witchcraft. Compared to the still primitive chaos, the 9 great worlds that had gone through prosperity to destruction evidently had a splendid civilization, and magic was one of its most dazzling gems. Even the war between Asgard and Vanaheim stemmed from this. The Vanir goddess Gullveig came to visit Odin. Her words showed no respect for the divine king, and according to later legends, it is said she came to boast of her magic power, or to argue which of the 2 deity races deserved more worship from humans. In the end, when Odin felt offended, he was the first to hurl his spear at her, and the gods all took their turn attacking her, but to no avail. They killed the goddess 3 times, but she resurrected herself 3 times using the power of magic. Ultimately, Gullveig strode back to Vanaheim, sparking the war between the 2 great realms. At Nobleban at. Hey, those are just some old events. If possible, I wouldn't want to continue in this state either. Trying to show a friendly smile, what appeared on Mimir's face instead seemed fierce and frightening. Strange deity, I don't know where you come from, or why you have come to Asgard's Golden Palace. Perhaps I can offer you some assistance. Without expressing any opinion on the giant's words, but considering that the other party was indeed more familiar with this place, Laine asked. I am here to find what the owner left behind, as well as the source of the rune symbols engraved on the palace. And, what happened here, and where did the original owners go? His heart stirring, Mimir quickly picked up on the key information from Laine's words. He seemed to have never heard of the existence of the divine King Odin, nor knew the name of the rune symbols. Any deity from the 9 worlds couldn't possibly be so ignorant, perhaps. Of course, what you seek is all in the treasury left by the divine king. I know where it is and can show you the way there. The smile on Mimir's skull became even brighter. He felt he finally had hope of leaving. However, the vault has been sealed. Without the correct method of opening it, its contents will scatter into the void, never to be found again. I can try to help you think of a way to open it, as I understand the owner of this place, but it will take some time. As for why this place has become like this, I'm sorry, I am not very clear either. Not clear. Raising an eyebrow, Laine said. As a part of this place, you're not aware of what has happened to your own location. Yes, I can explain the specific situation to you one by one. Then let's talk on the way. You guide me, and before we find that vault, you can recount your past as much as you like. With a wave of his long sleeve, Laine gathered the undying bright flame into his sleeve, then had the tray holding Mimir's skull come to his side. As a titan, Mimir's head was still several times larger than a normal person's after being processed with rituals and herbs. It looked strangely eerie. As you wish, I will recount the past to you. Having agreed, Mimir pointed in a direction and then began to tell Laine of his experiences. Walking on the road to the vault and listening to the head's narrative, Laine gradually came to understand the history of this place. Most of the history of Asgard was similar to later myths, with only some parts deliberately obscured or misinterpreted by Mimir, who also blackened the existence of some gods. Still, Laine, comparing it to the accounts in Scandinavian mythology, easily distinguished the truth from the falsehoods. However, he kept a poker face and didn't point out any issues. Instead, he continued to play the role of an outer deity who knew nothing of this land. The original life of the world, the Titan Ymir was born at the intersection of ice and fire, the birth of the world tree, the appearance of the 9 realms, and even the elves, dwarves, titans. It was all no different from mythology, until the twilight of the gods came. Unlike the records of later generations, this time, faced with the inevitable disaster, the gods did not accept their fate passively but tried all kinds of resistance. Ultimately, before the twilight was upon them, the divine King Odin seemed to have truly found a solution, or perhaps discovered something unexpected. In any case, he secretly gathered the gods, but this time the assembly didn't occur within the Golden Palace, so Mimir didn't know what they discussed. After the assembly, Odin briefly returned to the palace, then left the Golden Palace alone. The other gods also departed one after another. What followed was the disintegration of the roots, the collapse of the world tree, the disintegration of the 9 realms, and everything fell into oblivion. According to Mimir, all this happened around 70 to 80,000 years ago. 70 to 80,000 years ago. He committed the number firmly to memory, and a ridiculous hunch began to take shape in Laine's mind, but he immediately pushed it aside. Not just because Mimir's narration had come to an end, but because he had arrived at his destination. Is this the treasure vault of the Golden Palace, the divine king's treasury? Looking at everything before him, Laine was somewhat skeptical. Of course, actually there are many vaults in the Golden Palace, but this is the most crucial one, also the only one that still exists. The rest, even if the vaults themselves are still intact, the treasures inside them have probably, like the common extinguished immortal flame in the Golden Palace, lost all their power. However, to open it, the correct method is still required, otherwise, once the vault collapses on itself, then nothing will be gained. Chapter 226. Chapter 52. The Broken Divine Lance and the Magic Box. Laine glanced at the skull of Mimir beside him, knowing what it meant. It was merely showing its worth, so that Laine wouldn't leave it behind, but Laine had no intention of abandoning it in the first place. On one hand, Mimir was the only living being Laine had encountered. On the other hand, the knowledge contained within this brain was of extraordinary value. The runic technology and magic of another world, so highly valued by the Aesir tribe, proved it was also a power that could threaten the deity. As for so-called unlocking the treasure vault, Laine didn't actually need its help. The self-destruction of the vault, Plummeting into the void was naturally a difficult problem to solve in Asgard, but Laine had no plans to open the treasure chest within the Aesir divine realm. As long as he could bring this vault back to the spirit realm, let itself destruct as it pleases. It would be a huge joke if a vault without its master could penetrate the 7-layer spatial barrier of the spirit realm, allowing the treasures to fall out. However, looking at the vault in front of him, Laine still had some admiration for the divine king's security measures. So, which deity is this statue sculpted to represent? Under Mimir's guidance, Laine could finally make out that Odin's so-called secret vault was actually in the belly of a goddess statue. Laine wondered what was on the mind of the divine king of Asgard to stash his treasures in such a place. But the effect was indeed successful. Without Mimir as an insider, Laine really wouldn't have thought there was a hiding place for treasures here. She is Gulveig, a goddess of the Vanir, and I have mentioned her to you before. As for her powerful magic that could easily reverse life and death, Odin was deeply impressed. He left images and sculptures of this goddess in many places because he hoped to change the outcome of the Twilight of the Gods, just like Gulveig reversed her own fate. But now, it seems he not only failed, but also made the catastrophe even more terrifying. Mimir was candid with his words, holding nothing back. That sounds interesting. Nodding, Laine made a mental note of the magic-savvy goddess. He wondered if he would be able to find any traces of her in the future, and whether she was truly already dead. But now it's time for us to leave. With a sweep of his sleeve, Laine collected the statue. A fair amount of time had passed, and the gains here were already sufficient. Some odds and ends might be of interest to ordinary deities, but they were not enough to keep Laine lingering. Ripping through the space, he stepped out of the Golden Palace. Laine surveyed the direction. He hadn't done this when he came in because the residual power of this ancient hall interfered with his senses, preventing him from accurately locating the coordinates within the realm under the realm's pressure, but leaving was much simpler. Are you heading to the Erd's well? Seeing Laine's actions, Mimir could not help but ask. Yes, in this shattered world, only there I am sure still holds something of existence, or do you have any suggestions? Not really, but if you can travel to other realms, I suggest you visit Jotunheim. That is the homeland of the Frost Titans, and there still lies the Spring of Wisdom and another section of Yggdrasil's roots. If the chance arises, I will. Laine said casually, then flashed away towards the distance. As the Titan who once watched over the Spring of Wisdom, Mimir certainly knew that place better. In fact, it was one of the 3 options Laine had initially planned. The last option was Niflheim, the Land of Mist, one of the first 2 of the 9 realms, in opposition to the Land of Fire. There, the 3rd section of the World Tree's roots grew, and Nidhogg the poison dragon also gnawed at the roots of Yggdrasil day and night, ultimately leading to the coming of the Twilight of the Gods. Thus, the beings that resided in Niflheim were known by another name in later times. However, their name was often misunderstood in many contexts and even in later records, where it was used to describe space rather than life. Their name is Nibelungen. Ellipsis. Each world has its own miracles, truly a splendid civilization. At Nobleban at. As he drew closer to the roots of Yggdrasil, Laine began to sense the power of this divine tree that supported the 9 realms. Even though it had withered and fallen into ruin, and its once vibrant life force had subsided into silence, its grandeur as a divine tree remained undiminished. When it was still alive, Yggdrasil certainly reached a great domain in terms of power. Yet it was like Mount Jo from the Eastern myths of later times, possessing the strength but not a unifying consciousness. Thus, the latter was toppled by the witch god, the former consumed by the dragon's gnawing. Their value in myths seems to illustrate the enormity of catastrophe. One brought floods and patched the sky, the other brought the doom of the gods. Every world. Ha! This esteemed stranger, come to mention it, I do not yet know your name. Hovering beside Laine, Mimir said with a smile. You can call me Laine. As for where I come from, you'll find out later. Continuing the conversation without stopping, the roots of the world tree stretching from the void now filled all in front of him. Chapter 227. Chapter 52. The Broken Divine Lance and the Magic Box _2. Rather than a tree root, it might be more accurate to describe it as a wooden wall, except looking upwards, that part which should have connected to the main body had already broken off. Laine felt some regret about this. The tree heart that supported the world tree of the 9 realms was an incredibly precious treasure. He had no idea whether the main body of Yggdrasil had fallen to a certain layer of the realm or had directly collapsed into the true void with the 9 realms, reverting from being back to nothingness. Where is Erd's fountain? Where is it? His gaze swept the ground, but unfortunately, Laine couldn't see anything that might suggest the presence of a fountain, much less the sacred spring water that contains vitality and purification. Fortunately, he was accompanied by a local. Before becoming a head, Mimir must have come here. It's a bit further north. In fact, although Yggdrasil's three main roots were each nourished by three different springs, it doesn't directly draw from the spring water. To some extent, they coexist, explained Mimir. Looking at Laine, Mimir did have some expertise in these matters. Only the oldest spring in the land of mist is an exception. It was born at the beginning of creation, which makes it special. The other two springs, as the tree withers, their power also wanes. I'm not sure if Erd's spring still holds its sanctity. I can only lead you to where it once was. That's enough, Laine said and nodded, then flew northward following the guidance of Mimir's skull. The main roots of Yggdrasil were unimaginably massive, and even the small tendrils that branched off were dense and numerous. The smallest were only as thick as the trunks of ordinary trees, while the largest were the size of several houses. Traveling through the dense network of roots, Laine soon found the destination. Just as Mimir had said, the place was no longer sacred. Erd's fountain, once a holy gathering site for the gods. In Scandinavian mythology, it was guarded by the three goddesses of fate, Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, symbolizing the past, present, and future respectively. They also wielded some measure of divine authority over the laws, and from this perspective, it must be said that despite different civilizations, the two worlds bore striking similarities in some aspects. It seemed that law and fate were always interdependent. But now, those were stories of the past. The once crystal clear water of the fountain had dried up, and the ruined surface of the earth was left with nothing but bare rocks and withered shrubs. The Flosa garden beside the fountain, formerly a path shaded with vibrant greenery and delicate, beautiful flowers, had been twisted beyond recognition by time and desolation. Erd's fountain was no longer the dazzling sight it once was, and the three goddesses who accepted the prayers of the living had vanished without a trace. It seems you were right. There's no fountain here anymore, Laine sighed. However, thanks to the existence of samsara, he found something between reality and illusion within the dried-up fountain. With an outstretched hand, an invisible seed fell into his palm, the last trace of the sacred spring. Perhaps in another 10 or 20,000 years, it too would lose all foundation for existence, leaving this holy site to become a part of history. Yet now, there was still a possibility of salvation. Find another coexisting element for it, nurture it with the power of the spirit realm, and perhaps it could birth the spring water anew. Next, the roots. At Nobleman at. Turning around, he looked up at the tall and withered root systems. Black sword appeared in Laine's right hand. The air of death gave Mimir a start, reminding him of Hel, the goddess who had been banished by Odin to the land of the dead. The half-dead, half-living goddess was not only fearsome to behold but was also far from kind. Now that Laine was displaying such power, it inevitably caused the Titan unease. After all, it didn't quite match the cooperative demeanor Laine had shown before. You're going to cut it open. Of course, if there's even a slight bit of vitality, it can only be in the core. I must cut it open to find it. If not, it's also fine to just segment and take it away as it is. World Tree was no ordinary thing. It couldn't be destroyed at will. Nidhogg the poison dragon took an entire epoch to gnaw through its roots, and even the one before him, already withered, was not easily cut. However, the power of death was quite useful in such a place. With both hands on black sword, Laine sliced harshly, and a streak of light followed, splitting the massive, wooden wall, down the middle to reveal its inner fibers. Unfortunately, compared to the vast root system, this damage accounted for nothing. There was still no trace of vitality in the wood. Narrowing his eyes, Laine gripped black sword again and slashed at the giant wood time and again. The tree root slowly revealed its interior, but in the end, even when he pared it down to its core, Laine couldn't find the part he was seeking. He had thought there would be something at the very core, like sap containing the origin, or something else. But in the end, when Laine dissected this mountainous root into pieces, they proved no different. Why is it like this? Can it be that Yggdrasil's roots are even less significant than Erd's fountain and that nameless fire? The giant tree Laine felled crashed to the ground, accompanied by a tremendous noise that kicked up clouds of dust, but all he felt was confusion. One of the three mighty roots of World Tree, so renowned for vitality, it once rooted itself in a sacred spring. Why was there not even a hint of the divine tree's original vitality left even after being entirely cut down? Chapter 228. Chapter 52. The Broken Divine Lance and the Magic Box _3. Could it really be because the world tree's connections to the fundamental laws of the 9 great kingdoms were too tight, so that as the world fell apart, it too lost all its power? Lord Laine, look over there. Suddenly, Mimir's voice rang out. Following the sound, Laine looked to where he was pointing. On a severed root, there unexpectedly was a section of what seemed to be an artificial stick, not naturally formed. It looked plain and ordinary, like any other common object. But looking at it, Laine immediately grew serious. An unmistakable man-made object being found within what remained of the original world tree's roots, and even when placed before one's eyes, not the slightest bit of peculiarity was perceivable. This alone was enough to prove its extraordinariness. What is that? Having some suspicions in mind, Laine still first asked the local, who was more knowledgeable. That is Gingnir, also known as Gingnir, the divine King Odin's weapon, a divine lance forged from the branches of the world tree. When it was whole, it possessed the powers of unerring strike and penetration. As long as it was thrown, it would surely pierce the body of the enemy. Moreover, anyone who swore an oath upon it was bound to have it fulfilled. With a somewhat nostalgic and incredulous expression, Mimir slowly narrated the history of this divine artifact. Laine nodded, as if listening intently, but in reality, he knew even more than what was being told. It was precisely because of the existence of this divine lance in Scandinavian mythology that the northern European humans later developed the tradition of throwing a spear at the opposing side before 2 armies clashed. Moreover, because it was said that when Odin threw his spear, it resembled a shooting star crossing the sky, people began the tradition of making wishes upon shooting stars. This legend even spread to every corner of the world, and even in the culturally distinct East, a great many people awaited the appearance of shooting stars. However, at this moment, before Laine and Mimir, the very divine artifact upon which divine King Odin relied for his undefeated conquests was already broken. It had lost its spearhead, leaving only the shaft. It seemed to still hold some vitality because, unsurprisingly, it had drained the vitality of the Yggdrasil segment of root. Perhaps its owner had once hurled the broken divine lance from a great distance, burying it deep within the roots, hoping to use the divine tree to repair and nurture his weapon, and to retrieve it someday. But now, it seemed, he never made it back. Let's go to the next kingdom. After a moment of silence, Laine picked up the broken divine artifact for a closer inspection, then, putting away what was before him, he spoke to Mimir at his side. Looking at the broken lance, it had been purified after absorbing the world tree's vitality, but Laine still keenly sensed the remnants of power that had once been upon it. Or more precisely, the remnants of emotion. Laine felt that his conjecture must have been confirmed. Hatred for all things, it seems, more terrifying by far than the ancient evil being, the Sun Eater, that I had crafted with my own hands. The ancient evil being, Sun Eater, that Laine had created, though devoid of reason, bore hatred for only one thing, the celestial body that emitted light and heat. But the hatred on this broken lance was different because it hated everything. Perhaps, it was left by a being similar to an eclipse but much more powerful, much more evil. And the likelihood is that the disappeared spearhead of the divine lance Gingnir had something to do with this. The destruction of a world. Haha. Heaven knows what was born under this symbol. It was hard to tell if it was trepidation or anticipation, but Laine summoned the skull of Mimir, ready to leave directly. At Nobleban at. Meanwhile, as Laine had finished a general exploration of Asgard, in the Chaos world, within the abyss, the great serpent that encircled the courtyard also opened its eyes. Laine's main consciousness was no longer present, but he had always kept a fraction of his mind in this special incarnation, so recent affairs from both the spirit realm and the mortal world had been relayed to him. Concerning some matters not too urgent, this incarnation of Laine did not care much. Strictly speaking, he and Laine's main consciousness were one and the same, it's just that this incarnation leaned more towards the evil aspect of his personality, and thus preferred to see events unfold in more interesting ways. He wasn't supposed to wake up now, yet at this moment, the impatient actions of a divine king in the mortal world had roused him from his slumber. The power he had once bestowed told him that the first woman of the chaos world was about to be born. You really are in a hurry, not even taking the time to judge the sinners, you're already laying the groundwork for the next era. Perhaps you've sensed something. The serpent's body lifted slightly, causing the entire plane to tremble. The smaller fragments outside the realm had already been pulled into chaos. They were small enough in size to be the quickest to transform, and perhaps within a few centuries, their ultimate fate, whatever it may be, should be decided. And it was only natural for Zeus, as a divine king, to be aware of this. A node. The deep and resonant voice echoed in the courtyard, Laine thought, and Liana in the spirit realm immediately received the message. She was to go to Olympus to bring a gift to the newly born female. After all, in any case, she was born from the water of the well of reincarnation's precursor, the well of origin. Go, put its reflection into it as my gift to humans, if indeed they can receive it. Yes, Your Highness. Even without seeing any figure, Liana had long grown accustomed. She collected what Laine had instructed and then left the spirit realm. From within the 9 hells, Laine surveyed the world, witnessing all that transpired upon the earth. Having lived through it once, he gained a deeper understanding of this history. Pandora's box, a symbol of disaster in legend, contained things both good and bad. Was the world in peace and harmony before the birth of this box, devoid of conflict and calamity? Of course not, the box was merely a symbol. It signified that the gods had finally begun to grasp some mysteries of faith, so each of them placed an item inside the box, whether a curse or a blessing, to symbolize the grandeur of God, and that good and evil, right and wrong, all come from God. As for the hope that was trapped inside the box, it was doomed never to fly out, for how could a fake ever become real? In a world controlled by fate, isn't real hope about stepping outside of fate? The serpent returned to its original position, no longer concerned with these trivialities. If the integration of the 9 realms once again twisted the fateful trajectory meant for chaos, then let it add fuel to the fire. Chapter 229. Chapter 53. The Eye of the Sea. You haven't left yet. Hurrying back to Aurora with the lit fennel branch, what appeared before Prometheus were the panicked crowds in the darkness and the crumbling order that no one managed. The divine king's verdict fell on the ears of deities, recounting the reasons he condemned humans, but it wasn't the same for mortals. Perhaps out of disdain to prove anything to mortals, or more likely because the divine king never intended to let them go, what humans understood was still that simple sentence. From today onwards, the fire granted to humans will be taken away. They heard those words, and then, just as they said, the flames in the human settlements were extinguished all at once, plunging into darkness and cold. Creator, I have been waiting for you to come back, because I believe you will sort this all out. In front of Prometheus's residence, facing the Creator's implicit questioning, Momen slightly bowed, trying to speak with a hint of joy. By his side were hundreds of people who had come to the Creator's residence in a panic seeking guidance. As the former high priest, they subconsciously saw Momen as their leader. Believe in me, perhaps. Momen, whatever you want to do, my time is running out, and you must have witnessed what befell Auson. With the sacred fire in his hand, Prometheus felt his mind had never been clearer than it was now. He immediately noticed the abnormality in his disciple standing before him. His body was tainted with an unusual bloodline, just like those beasts stained with divine blood. Only, the aura contained in this bloodline was nothing like that of a deity. Instead, it reminded him of those from silver humanity. If it were any other time, Prometheus might have tried to probe for the reason, but now, he didn't have the time. The god of sun must be on his way, and when the sun rose the next day, it would be the moment he was taken back to Olympus. The humans would ultimately have to persevere on their own. This is the new fire. It will not be taken back by any deity. I will leave it here, and once I am gone, no one, neither human nor god, will be able to move it. It will forever shelter this city. Inserting the burning fennel branch into the altar originally used for worship, Prometheus looked at everyone present. If in the future you wish to establish a new settlement, or protect those we have already established, take some from this sacred fire. It can help you dispel the darkness and calamity too. But remember, only the initial flame is truly eternal. Once the fire that's been taken away is extinguished, the town it was in will lose its protection. I will. Bowing respectfully, in that moment Momen also felt a bit melancholic. It's hard not to respect an entity with beliefs, whether they are a good person or a bad one, whether one mocks or praises them. It's not about power, but respect for pursuing the impossible. I hope so, if, after I leave, the Divine King still refuses to spare humans, you could try leading some westward. If you can find Delphi, perhaps for the sake of the temple, the Divine King might spare you too, added nobleman at. With a complex expression, Prometheus offered a final word of caution, though he didn't think it held much meaning. After all, in this era, how could mortals possibly traverse the wilderness by their own power and reach the distant ancestral human lands? Consider it a hope, for in disaster, having hope is somewhat better than none at all. No need to follow. I'll walk alone. Waving his hand, Prometheus stopped those who wanted to say something, then left the center of Aurora. It was still a while before dawn. He wanted one last look at the humans he had created, for the next time might be many years later. Dawn was breaking, but the sun did not rise as expected. Outside of Aurora City, two figures were approaching. Cohen, you heard that voice just now, didn't you? Evans sounded somewhat afraid because of the voice that had suddenly spoken, as well as the extinguished torch in his hand. But he wasn't too afraid, for although that voice claimed to take back the fire given to humans, that wasn't really the case. His torch had gone out, but the one in Cohen's hand had not. They had traveled the latter half of the night aided by that light. This made Evans wonder if everything before had been an illusion, perhaps his torch had been extinguished by the wind, not because of that sudden voice. I heard it. Take back the fire given to humans, that must be the divine king's voice, right? Unlike Evans, who knew nothing, Cohen recognized the voice. 100 years ago, he had gazed at that deity from the base of Mount Othrys, watching him challenge the previous divine king with righteous words, so he remembered his tone. And according to what other humans said, that deity was named Zeus, now the world's third divine king. The voice of a deity. Then why is your fire untouched? Not quite believing, Evans now thought that perhaps what had just happened was actually some prank by this stern-looking fellow. Chapter 230. Chapter 53. The Eye of the Sea _2. Backquote. Because gods are different from one another. The deity who bestowed fire upon me probably won't care about such a trivial matter, let alone take the fire back. After silently praying in his heart, Cohen extended his hand and moved the torch closer to Evans. What are you doing? Your torch should be able to light now. As a mortal legend only a step away from his own divinity, Cohen acutely felt the change in the law before and after. The right related to fire for the bronze humanity had first been taken away and then quickly returned. However, the one that returned felt almost identical to his own in Cohen's perception. Reaching out towards the flame, soon enough, Evans's torch was lit once again. Looking at the burning torch, he felt this was more like a joke Cohen was playing on him. He was about to say something, but then a scene on a mound behind Cohen suddenly stirred Evans with excitement. Look, Cohen, is that the creator? Wait, who is that person? Among the gods, Prometheus was one of the few who left Cohen with fond memories, and he had once revered and devoutly worshipped the Titan deity who mingled among the golden humanity. Even though he could no longer hold on to that feeling, Cohen still had a favorable impression of him. Following the gaze, in the faint light of dawn spreading across the sky, Cohen saw Prometheus and a tall male wearing golden attire by his side. They were two deities. This was the intuition given to Cohen by the special substance integrated into his body. Had it been before, he would have respectfully saluted the gods, but now, he just watched from afar, even with a bit of wariness. Because at the same time, the others were looking at them. And the moment the unfamiliar god saw them, a clear expression of disgust flashed across his eyes. Whoosh! In the next moment, a streak of golden light shot through the air, heading towards them with a speed beyond mortal capture. Prometheus seemed to want to stop it, but being not adept at fighting, he couldn't react in time. However, watching all of this, Cohen just took a step forward. The strength circulating in his blood collected in his right hand, and then he grabbed toward the golden light. Boom! His right foot sank into the ground, causing a nearly 100-meter radius around him to dip slightly, accompanied by a loud noise and a cloud of dust rising into the air. Within the dust, unflinchingly, Cohen grasped the bronze spear enveloped in golden light. The powerful attack that could destroy a city wall was casually caught, and Evans, by his side, was almost too scared to speak. Looking at the being clearly not of the mortal world, Cohen, for the first time, spoke to a deity on equal footing. Who are you, and why have you attacked me? Does one need a reason to kill an ant? Looking somewhat displeased, Helios had not expected that a demigod that came out of nowhere would pretend to be a human, and he had not recognized it earlier. As for Cohen being a human, what a joke, he was unaware that humans could now stand against deities on the earth. At Nobleman at. HMPH, be gone, this is not a place for you. With a cold snort, admitting to a mistake was one thing, but Helios was not about to apologize. He no longer paid attention to Cohen and Evans, instead focusing on Prometheus, who was about to be captured by him. The god of sun who would casually attack a mortal carrying the scent of his father god does not imply he would kill a powerful demigod without reason. After all, who knows which deity's offspring the other party might be, and whether they might bring trouble upon him. What's wrong? Prometheus, feeling scared now. It's too late for regrets. Noticing that the forethinker was still looking at the demigod beside him, the god of sun felt somewhat displeased. Do you recognize him? If he is human, then I surely recognize him. Looking away, Prometheus then urged. Let us go. I am ready to face the trial. Then let's go. Seizing Prometheus, Helios blinked back to his sun chariot, which was also the reason why the sun had yet to rise that day. The sun chariot, without the golden chariot's pull, was nothing but a frame. Drawn by 4 horses flowing with divine blood, the sun chariot carried the 2 deities rapidly towards Mount Olympus. Meanwhile, on the earth below, only 2 overlooked humans watched everything unfold. They did not know that the scene just now was Prometheus's last morning in the Bronze Age. Evans, who had been frightened by the golden light before, was slowly regaining his composure. With his cheerful and enthusiastic nature, he was quite accepting of this reality. As the shock wore off, he looked at Cohen, part incredulous and also a touch excited. Cohen, you just. I am human, not a deity. With a slight shake of his head, until Prometheus and the god who suddenly attacked him left, Cohen ultimately did nothing. The forethinker recognized him but seemed not willing to speak to him. Therefore, Cohen did not insist. After all, until now, he still didn't clearly understand what the 2 gods were here for. But as he watched the golden chariot, he also roughly knew who the attacking deity was. The god of sun, Helios, a titan deity who once served the former divine king. The golden humanity had once revered each deity equally, so they couldn't understand why the divine king was above other deities. However, Cohen now understood. Humans were equal because of their virtues, so even as the king of the golden humanity, Cohen did not feel himself any more noble than other humans. But it seems the deities rarely possess such virtues, hence the gods' hierarchy.